Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of The Numbers. And Philippe, I notice that you're not wearing a jersey. Have you already stopped believing?
No. I just want to mix it up a little bit. Yes, the Oilers last night, that was quite a butt kicking.
That was
but
rough.
it's 2-1, and I remember last year in the final between Edmonton and Florida, there were a few lopsided games, and it ended up going to 7. So you never know, but no, I have other work-related things to do today, so I I didn't wear my jersey. But maybe I will next episode, right? So
Yeah,
we'll see.
I mean, everything was going well at first, and then, so I guess we saw what happened.
Yeah.
Anyway, that'll be enough for our sports talk portion of the episode, and we'll get to the other athletic activity, which is the battle for the minds and love of Canadians between our political leaders. We've got lots of stuff we're going to talk about today. We got some federal polling. We got some polling out of Alberta and Ontario. We got the Quebec Liberal leadership race that is happening this weekend.
That's right.
And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I think first we'd start with some of these federal polls. We haven't spent too much time talking about federal polling numbers over the last few weeks because you know what? Just had an election, what was it now? A month and a bit ago.
Yep.
Well, we got some interesting new numbers. We got some Carney approval rating numbers from the Angus Reid Institute and the usual kind of deep dive from the Abacus data. Why don't we start there? I'll just give the top lines and then you can give some reactions to some of the numbers. But the top lines were very similar to the last election. We got 42% for the Liberals, 39% for the Conservatives, 8% for the NDP, and in Quebec the Bloc was at 29%, roughly 13, 14 points behind the Liberals again. But there's the information I think is more interesting when you look at Carney's own numbers.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, when we talk about buyer's remorse or honeymoons for politicians, this is pretty like a clear honeymoon that Carney is having. We know these numbers don't usually last, which may explain why Mr. Carney seems to be hyperactive on several files. And I mean, we know that the spring sitting will end soon, and so they have to ram legislation and projects through the House of Commons very fast. But to have a plus 30 for the Liberals, for Mr. Carney, plus 30 approval for government, that was from Abacus data, 53-23. This is huge, right? To have only 23% disapprove of the government, considering that, what was it, 46% of people did not vote for the Liberals. This is what a honeymoon is when your opponents just lay down their arms and says, okay, we'll tolerate this for a while. It looks pretty good. We don't like it, but we approve for now. And what I wonder is what the numbers, will it last through the summer? Will it last through the fall? And Mr. Carney, Eric, we know ran a lot in contrast with what's going on in the United States and facing Donald Trump. And you may have seen south of the border, there's a bit of turmoil. Would you say that? Yeah, it's not going well. So maybe this is to the advantage of Mr. Carney. What's your interpretation of those numbers, Eric?
Well, first off, it is that things are going as well as they seem to be for Mark Carney and the Liberals, because so that poll had 53% government approval. So this is separate from Carney, but the government as a whole, 23% disapproval. I thought a couple months ago, Canadians were just in a bit of a grumpy mood. A lot of governments might have been underwater, but no. It was related especially to this government, because you don't need to go back very far. Back when Justin Trudeau resigned, the first poll that Abacus did after that had 21% approval for the government and 63% disapproval. So we got a huge swing. We got 40% of the electorate that disliked what the Liberal government was doing 6 months ago, or 5 months ago. And now they like it. That's a huge shift. That's we're talking about 2 and 5 Canadians have changed their minds about the government. So this is a honeymoon right now for Mark Carney and the Liberals. And as you said, they do seem to be trying to cash in on it and trying to get as much stuff pushed through as they can at the beginning of a mandate, which is usually how you do things. But what I find really interesting about these kinds of numbers is that so we have a 53% government approval for the Liberals. Mark Carney's own positive ratings are 51%,
Yeah.
27% negative. Those are really good numbers.
Yeah.
But we still only have a 3-point gap between the Liberals and the Conservatives. The honeymoon is not extending to the Liberal Party. When Justin Trudeau became the new Prime Minister in 2015, the Liberals shot up into over 40%. The Conservatives dropped into the 20s. There was a big lead for Justin Trudeau's Liberals after that election. So we saw the honeymoon not only extend to Justin Trudeau's personal numbers, the government's personal numbers, but to the party, the voting intentions. But we don't see that here. What do you think about that?
Well, was it okay? So I remember those early Trudeau numbers in I guess it would be early 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Was it like a month after? Because it feels like it's a bit a bit early. Like there are a lot of voters. I mean, again, 41% voted for the Conservatives. If they like the actions and the early actions of Mr. Carney, perhaps they'll, some of them, a small fraction of them will switch, but they won't switch right away. They will take a few months. I wonder, I mean, I don't have those numbers in front of me. That's a good question, though. But did the Trudeau Liberal number in like late 2015 really shot up right after? I think it took a few months. So there are still, I think there are still, I don't want to say shell shock because that's too strong of it. But I think many Canadians are still like, okay, what the hell happened there? We had a snap election. We had a very eventful winter and spring. And now things are, they will soon slow down, we think. And I think it will be an occasion for many voters to reflect on whether they like this. But the polarization that we saw, the Liberals can't get much higher than this, Eric. I mean, in 2015, Trudeau had many NDP voters to pull support from. The NDP had, 20% in that election? Well, there's no NDP left. They had 6.3% of the vote, and they're still polling in single digits right now. So, and all we're seeing right now reminds me of a very good Beaverton headline that we saw during the election, and I will quote it here because it's the Beaverton. Mark Carney not sure what he has to do to alienate left-wing voters anymore. Which I thought was interesting because we don't have right now a left-of-center government. We have a Mark Carney who wants to bring the Liberals back to the center, stealing ideas left and right, especially right, and it seems to be working. And, traditionally left-of-center parties from coast to coast are not doing well right now, maybe except Manitoba.
I think that what Mark Carney has going for him in terms of that left-of-center vote is that it's still Pierre Poilievre as the leader of the Conservatives. And a lot of those voters will stick with the Liberals for as long as they are afraid that the Conservatives would come back into power, right? So I think that is the thing that he has going for him. It's not about him alienating left-of-center voters. It's the Conservatives still seeming like the worst option for those left-of-center voters. And I think that is the obstacle that the Conservatives still have. We saw some chatter about when the Conservatives would have their leadership convention or the vote where there would be a leadership review. It seems like now it might only be in the spring next year. So it sounds like Pierre Poilievre has some time in front of him. There's something kind of interesting with these numbers. I chatted about it last week in our number of the week where Pierre Poilievre was 19 points behind Mark Carney on preferred prime minister. We see in this poll from Abacus Data that Pierre Poilievre's negatives are back up to 44. His positives are down to 39. There's definitely been a shift over the last few months that is a bit election campaign related. But the fact that the Conservatives are still only a few points behind the Liberals kind of gives them some hope that as long as they hold that number, that inevitably the Liberals will drop down, right? So I think that is what kind of saves Pierre Poilievre right now, or might keep some people in the fold.
So the Angus Street Institute, we mentioned it a few minutes ago, in their poll, they have, do you have an overall favorable or unfavorable view of, and then the leaders, right? Obviously for the NDP, Don Davies is not known by most Canadians. He just got here as an interim, so we can ignore him for now. But Pierre Poilievre, 57% negative, 39% positive. That's a minus 18. And only 4% undecided. And so as much as I do that these cycles of favorables and unfavorables, when you start, usually you shut up, and then gradually you go down. And once you go down, it's really rare that you recover. Like Justin Trudeau never recovered his bad numbers until he announced he resigned and until he faced Donald Trump. He recovered a little bit, but a little bit. I just don't see how Pierre Poilievre can recover his personal numbers until I saw the breakdown. So the age breakdown, the male-female breakdown, all over 50% negative for M. Poilievre. But the partisan breakdown, 90% of conservative voters, 2025 conservative voters, still have a favorable view of M. Poilievre. So at least the base right now is not fracturing. There may be conservative MPs who think, I don't think you can win with this guy. But when I see a 90% favorable to 9% unfavorable, for me, that means the base is still behind Poilievre. What you just said about the next convention, though, I was under the impression that the Conservative convention would be like this fall, like as soon as possible, so that Poilievre can have his leadership review. If you wait a little bit, maybe that gives members more time to think. Am I wrong about this?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it also gives, I guess, the Conservatives, Poilievre's team time to prepare for such a thing. But I kind of agree with what you just pointed out, or at least I build off of that. I don't think the membership is upset with Pierre Poilievre. Yeah. Think about, first of all, how many people signed up for the party under him. It was, what, 600,000?
Yeah.
He won it pretty handily. And a lot of the folks that would have voted against him in that leadership race, the Jean Charest folks, probably not members of the party anymore. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
So I don't think that I think there is a lot of love for Pierre Poilievre within the Conservative Party. It as the grassroots. I mean, we saw that in the rallies that he was able to put up during that race.
Yep.
It's true that some people within the chattering classes of the Conservative Party, the pundits, the
MPs,
and the
right?
MPs and the strategists and all those kinds of people might look at what his track record was in that campaign and say, he didn't pivot. Sure, he didn't. He got a really high vote, but it's you're graded on a curve based on how your opponent did.
Oh yeah,
and maybe he can't do it. But I think for the vast majority of the membership, he is the embodiment of how they view the Conservative Party. They want him chomping apples.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious how long this can kind of last, though. Because Pierre Poilievre became leader in September 2022. Within, what was it, 8-10 months, he had opened up a big lead over the Liberals.
Yeah.
This is going to be the first time where he's not leading at all, because I think even post leadership, he was up by a couple points, right?
Exactly.
This will be the first time that he could have an extended period where he is trailing. And that is, I guess, what I'm curious about, how nervous some of that caucus is going to be about him, whether they think that he can't get them to the next point where they get back into government.
Those same numbers in BC, minus 17 for Pierre Poilievre. In Ontario, minus 15. In Quebec, minus 38. Atlantic Canada, minus 24. Only in Saskatchewan and Alberta was he above water. And even in Saskatchewan, it was a plus 9. And Alberta was plus 13. You would expect a Conservative leader to get better numbers in the prairies. So I don't know what they do with this. But again, maybe this is the result of us being too close to the election. It's still too warm. The body is still warm, basically. But you're right. I mean, if we go into the fall and deeper into the fall and soon into the winter, and Mark Carney's Liberals is still in a honeymoon, I mean, we don't know how long the honeymoon lasts. For Trudeau, it lasted for years until he did that India trip, right? Monsieur Queneau in Manitoba is still in a honeymoon right now. It could be 3 months, but it could also be a year and a half. And so I wonder how long it will take for them to sour. And obviously, I mean, we'll get back to this at some point, but that by-election in Alberta, I think the results of that by-election could tell us a lot about how Monsieur Poilievre will do in the future. We'll see. But anyway.
You say how long it could last, and you said how Trump the juxtaposition between Trump and Carney helps Carney.
Oh yeah.
The Abacus data had an interesting breakdown. So it asks, like, what if you had to place 3 issues in your top 3 issues?
Yep.
61% said the rising cost of living. 42% included in their top 3 Donald Trump and his administration handling that. And then the third one was the economy. 36% was the most quoted issue. On the rising cost of living, the Conservatives, among the people who named that as their top issue, were ahead by 10 points.
Yeah.
Right? So they still have an inroad on that issue. On the economy, it was effectively tied. The Liberals were ahead by 1 point. But on Donald Trump and his administration, the Liberals had a 48-point lead over the Conservatives. Still.
That's insane. Yeah.
So, sure, it does seem like the relations between Mark Carney and Donald Trump seem to be a bit better, and maybe that is what Canadians want, someone who's going to be able to deal with him rather than just kind of poke him in the eye. We'll see what happens at the G7 meeting. We'll see what's going to happen with a lot of these things. But as long as that remains a top issue, and there does seem to be some indication that it's dropping as an issue, we saw that in the Angus Reid Institute poll.
Yeah.
The Liberals still have such a commanding advantage on that issue that any time Canadians get distracted or, pay attention to what's happening in the United States because it's important, I think that is usually going to be a good day for the Liberals. So as long as that happens, maybe the honeymoon holds until something breaks down in that relationship between Carney and Trump. But it could hold for a while. Like I heard someone talking, I think it was on Curse Politics podcast, mentioned like when the next election would be. Is it going to be within the Trump presidency? There's a decent chance, right? So it still could be the Trump card.
In the third term, or
No, this is a minority government. This is probably going to last 2 or 3 years. But anyway, it's still one of the things that the Liberals have going for them is that comparison to Donald Trump, the United States.
Well, you would have to hope that they don't lean on that for a whole term, though. But you
have to.
You lean on what works. I mean, this is politics, right? You have to win. If you want to change the system, you have to win. So. And regarding that, you remember last week we talked about that Polara poll about the premiers, and we were a bit shocked to see Doug Ford having such strong numbers from coast to coast. Remember that poll, right? I wrote about that this week, and it's related to what I'm saying because obviously the chatter is, well, if Doug Ford is so popular from coast to coast, even a plus 30 in Quebec, it doesn't speak French, plus 30 in Quebec, the call would be, well, this guy is the most popular conservative politician in the country, and perhaps they should give him another look, eventually if Poilievre decides to leave or is pushed out. And the overwhelming comment I got, not by email, people calling me on radio stations, that, but Doug Ford is not that conservative. That's what I had as a comment. And I know there are several flavors of conservatives, but at some point, perhaps they will realize that to win, you have to add and not subtract. Like, you may not be as conservative as many would like, especially in the West, but he wins.
I'd like to see some breakdowns on how Liberals see him, especially outside of Ontario, how New Democrats see him. Maybe he's super popular among the Carney folks, right? So I don't know. That's a good question. And just one last thing I wanted to chat about, or at least point out. You talked about how the Liberals adopting a lot of policies that the Conservatives like.
That's right.
The 2% spending on national defense seems to apply to that. The Angus Reid Institute had some new polling on that. It does find that support for meeting our 2% targets is going up. So I think that Carney is pushing on an open door. You can look at, they had some tracking going back quite a while, but if you look at, what was it? If I could find it, sorry.
It went up from every party except the Bloc, but the Bloc is such a small sample. But I think Canadians, especially with what we see in the United States and the worries that we have about NATO and Russian expansion, there is. Of course, if you face them with, it's going to be $25 billion, which is roughly half of the deficit right now. So a little less than that. Deficit is 60. But the public opinion is on side right now for increased defense spending, according to the numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's higher among conservatives than among liberals, and lower among New Democrats. But you see that even among New Democrats, a majority support increasing spending. So yeah, pushing it on an open door, and again, not in a way that is going to put off the conservatives and conservative voters and people who might. The Abacus poll had 57%, if I'm not mistaken, of the population. If I can just make sure I got it right, yeah, 57% is an accessible voter for the Liberals, right? Some of those have to be conservatives. There's not that many new Democrats left.
Nope. Exactly.
So there are still some places that he could actually grow from taking from the conservatives if he is taking a lot of their policies that people like. If for some of these voters you get all the policies that the conservatives had, but you have Mark Carney that maybe you like more than Pierre Poilievre, that's not a bad option for those voters. So the risk is, though, if that NDP number starts creeping back up to 15, 18%, then the Liberals might have to worry about their left flank. But I think for now, I think Pierre Poilievre is shoring up their left flank. That's my view.
Before we move off to the provinces, you asked about Doug Ford's numbers with federal vote. Well, I have those numbers.
Ooh.
So let me just make sure I have the right row. Okay. Among liberals, this is federal liberals, Doug Ford is 51 favorable, 31 unfavorable. That's a plus 20.
Across the country or in Ontario?
Across the country, from coast to coast. Conservatives, among conservatives from coast to coast, 57% favorable, 25% unfavorable. So that's a plus 32.
That's quite lower than what Pierre Poilievre's numbers would be, though.
Oh, God. And you don't want to... I mean, I know it's a smaller sample, but a funny one among New Democrats. 35% favorable, 40% unfavorable. So among New Democrats...
They're split.
Doug Ford is a -5 among New Democrats. And among Bloc Québécois is a 40% favorable, 13 negative. He's a plus 27. He would be popular among Bloc voters. These numbers, Jesus, this is incredible. I hadn't seen
Doug
these
Ford,
numbers.
the new leader of the sovereignist movement in Quebec, and maybe it could help him out.
Can you imagine, though? I mean, those numbers. Like, I had many people in the commentariat in Quebec saying, well, there's no way Doug Ford is popular in Quebec. It's like, well, these numbers. Like, many people don't know him. Half Quebecers don't know who Doug Ford is, basically. But the other half, they like him. That's incredible. Anyway, let's move on.
Let's move on to, we'll do it quickly there, because we talked about a little bit last week, and the Abacus poll. So anyway, we got polls from Alberta and Ontario. Abacus Data did a poll. It was part of their omnibus, I think, because the sample is relatively small at 400, and it's also getting a bit dated because it was done in the middle of May. But the poll kind of aligned with the Janet Brown poll that we talked about last week. It had 58% for the United Conservatives, 32% for the NDP. And on the question of agree that Alberta become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada, 18% for, 69% against. So a lot more on the fence than we saw in that Janet Brown poll. But again, the same kind of huge gap on that question and a lead for the UCP. And then in Ontario, we got a poll from Léger, and it had 45% for the PCs, 32% for the Liberals, 15% for the NDP, 5% for the Greens. Effectively the same as what we saw in the last election. And some good approval rating numbers again for Doug Ford. But anything strike you from these two polls from the provinces?
I'm glad Abacus is polling Alberta. We need more polls out of Alberta, and we had Léger. The thing is, Janet Brown, she polls a lot. It's just it doesn't become public. She has clients, right? So rarely we have CBC Calgary, bless them, that will commission a poll that will go public. But no, these numbers are online with what we see. It's there's a conservative faction in Alberta that wants to separate. Daniel Smith has to deal with that. And it's interesting because I've read many columns by serious people saying, how will Mark Carney deal with Alberta separatism? And these numbers suggest right now that but he doesn't have to deal with them. It's Danielle Smith's problem right now, right? She has to face his voters sooner than Mark Carney, and it's within her own party. So that's going to be very interesting to follow. And as for Ontario, nothing really. The NDP brand is taking a little hit, a small hit. But for me, in that Léger poll, it was the fact that Léger polled also federally and saw that the Liberals, the federal Liberals, gained, 5 points since the election in Ontario, and that's a big sample size, just Ontario. So no buyer's remorse, little honeymoon, as we said. I think the narrative holds for now.
Okay, I wanted to talk a lot, not a lot, but I wanted to delve into the Quebec Liberal leadership race that is coming to a close this weekend.
Yeah.
And it will be blessed by the presence of Philippe J. Fournier, who will be
Well,
observing just to make sure everything's okay.
Yeah, that's right.
He's going to make sure everything goes according to Hoyle, which I don't know what that means, but I like saying it. So who's going to win it? Philippe, come on.
Oh, God. So, okay. Our listeners and the regular readers of my columns know that I like to use polls to modelize and to project, to make, I don't want to say predictions, but yeah, sometimes when we near the end of a race, to make a prediction. I really can't this time. I just can't, because of the numbers that I've seen, numbers that have been published and not, do not compare to the incredible, but I do mean incredible, spread of point worths between the voters. So some voters, you need 187,000 points to win. Every riding is worth 300 points, basically. Okay, but in that 3,000 points, 3,000. That's right.
Yeah.
But 1,000 out of the 3,000, so a third, is only for members 25-year-old and under. Right. There are 15 ridings in Quebec with one member under 25. Those 15 people individually each are worth 1,000 points. Whereas regular voters, let's say in riding in Montreal, I checked. I didn't have access to the full list, but I was told bits and pieces of information. A place like Ville-Saint-Laurent. Ville-Saint-Laurent, of course, is very liberal. So voters there will be worth about 1.5 points or maybe 2 points. And you will have voters that have 500 times more weight in the tally. And so there is no polling that you can do of the population or even of the membership. Like a random poll of the membership cannot account for these spread in points between members. And so I just can't make a call. It's just so weird.
Those 15 people,
yeah,
assuming they all vote,
yeah,
are worth what? They're worth somewhere around like 8% or 8 or 9% of the entire vote.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah,
That's
and basically
insane.
also there are 40. I mean, I said for 15 ridings when only one member under 25. There are 46 additional ridings with fewer than 5.
Wow.
So my math tells me, my rough math, approximate math, that basically 200 members, or 1% of the whole membership, have 17% of the points.
Wow.
And so you can have, I mean, the winner of the popular vote probably will not be, unless there's a route that we didn't see coming. We think that Pablo Rodriguez will get the most votes. He has, he's popular in Montreal. Montreal are where most members are. But if you have one guy in Repentigny who's worth 1,000 points, and you have 400 people in Ville-Saint-Laurent who are worth 2 points each, so the spread is completely insane. And also it's something that I learned last week. I didn't know. So it's a preferential ballot, right? But it's only 2 rounds. It's a runoff. So after the first round, only the top 2 are left, and then the bottom 3, all their second choices, their next choice will be factored in. So let's say whoever. I mean, there are 3 serious contenders in this: Charles Milliard, Carl Blackburn, and of course Pablo Rodriguez. The one who finished third could have a chance in the normal ballot to say, well, if I have second places from the 4th and the 5th, I could rise up. Nope, it's a runoff.
Wow.
So yeah, I'll be there because I'm curious to see how it unfolds. And also, the Quebec Liberal Party is one of the rare parties in Quebec or federally that I've never been to their event. So I'm gonna go shake some hands and see how it goes. But so, what is your read of this race, Eric? What do you have to say about this?
Well, the numbers that you had that good column in the L'Actualité about
Thank you.
these disparities. It does make it hard to predict. Now, we don't know. It could be very well that those young voters will break largely the same way as the other voters, so it might not have a huge impact, but it could have a huge impact. It could be that it's because of the system that ends up electing the leader rather than the voters in a really kind of disproportionate way. So you mentioned there's 3 front runners. There's 5 candidates in all. The 2 other ones are Mario Roy and Marc Bélanger, who are not very well known.
No.
With all due respect to them. But so we got Pablo Rodriguez, the former Liberal MP, Carl Blackburn, who was a former MNA, and Charles Milliard, who's in the business world. This would be his first kind of electoral politics. I took a look at some of the donations for the leadership race, and Pablo Rodriguez is raising the most money. Charles Milliard is second, Blackburn is third. So if we follow the money, which is usually a good predictor, it would suggest that those would be the top 3. The other 2 are way behind. Those would be the top 3. But again, it all depends on where that money's coming from, or where those votes are coming from. I took a look at it. 217 of Rodriguez's 712 donors are in Montreal. The next,
that's like 28%. That's not disproportionate.
That's Montreal.
Okay. Yeah.
There's another 51 in Westmount. There's another 49 in Montreal.
Oh, city.
So you got in all, you're starting to get quite a bit of now. That's where a lot of Liberal voters are, or Liberal members, and Blackburn and Milliard also have lots of voters on donors on the island of Montreal. But it will depend on how it breaks down. Blackburn seems to have a decent amount of votes out in Saguenay, where he was in MNA before. So we'll see how it's going to break down. I think it could be pretty surprising, but I mean, it does matter who ends up winning this thing.
It will be the leader of the opposition, right? And right now with the CAQ, I mean, we'll have more polling in Quebec next week, but I mean, it's fair to say the numbers that we have had, and the CAQ is in shambles right now, and so there's a huge opening for the Quebec Liberals if they can pick themselves up and try to appeal more to Francophone voters. So I mean, the Liberals could tank. They could absolutely tank this next campaign, but at least they have a reasonable shot right now. There's an opening now. What they do with it, to your point, it's just that Carl Blackburn has the establishment. He was an MNA, but that was 25 years ago, right? That's a lot. I mean, it's the Charest years, the early Charest years. Milliard is not known, and we saw in that Léger poll in May that Milliard doesn't move the needle at all. So this may turn off
kind of seen as
voters.
like almost a generic Liberal, right?
Yeah, exactly. But he is younger, and he's had a good, mostly positive campaign, and so I could see the Liberals betting on Milliard for a long-term thing. Like maybe we won't win the next election, but we're betting on the future. And Pablo Rodriguez, even though the Quebec Liberals in general are really wary of their federal cousins, they want to keep their distance from the federal Liberals. It's just that the PLQ should be green with envy of the numbers the federal Liberals pulled in Quebec in the past decade, right? So if you want potentially immediate results, Pablo's your guy. If you're looking for long term, Charles Milliard may be your guy. And if you're looking for just establishment, known quantity, you're looking for Blackburn. So that's why it's so interesting. But I wanted to make this comparison. It's a journalist told me this comparison. I didn't think of that, but you remember the PQ leadership race after Pierre-Carl Péladeau? So basically, it came down to Alexandre Cloutier versus Jean-François Lisée, right? Alexandre Cloutier, good-looking, smart, younger. He's now an academic. I think he was in Université Laval or something. And then you have Jean-François Lisée, former speechwriter of Jacques Parizeau, and of course, sovereign
political commentator on TV. As well.
Yeah, on TV and magazines, former journalist. And it was clear that if you bet on the PQ's future, Cloutier was your guy. But if you bet on right away, it was Lisée. Lisée won and was a disaster electorally. So no offense to Monsieur Lisée. So maybe there's a similarity here. If they choose Blackburn, maybe it's their Lisée. If they choose Milliard, maybe it's their Cloutier. So I don't know. We'll see.
And we did see some polling that would suggest that Rodriguez would boost the Liberals to become the chief rival of the Parti Québécois right now.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the other two leaders wouldn't have that impact in the short term. The next election is
Next
16
year.
months away.
Yeah.
So, that's not a huge amount of time for an unknown. So, I guess we'll see if that comes into the calculations. But if Rodriguez does not win, and he's looking at just how well the Liberals did in this past federal election, I wonder if he would have some. You mentioned buyer's remorse. Maybe he'd have seller's remorse. Should have held on to that stock.
Didn't he have like one of the safest Liberal seats in the whole country? Like Saint-Léonard, I think it was. Yeah. So,
Honoré Mercier, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's it. That's right. Oh, well. We'll see. But more on that next week. Next week, we'll have Quebec polling, and we'll have a new Liberal leader, and I will tell you my impressions of the buffet or something at the Quebec Liberal Convention. So.
Why don't we move on to the number of the week? What do you got?
Okay, so basically, well, we said it. It's about the Quebec leadership. So 187,000 points. My number of the week was those 200 members that are worth 17%. We
should have those 15 on the podcast. We can talk.
Oh my God! I mean,
it's so small. We could actually.
I mean, do they know? Thing is, members don't have access to the members list, but the leadership candidates do. Do those 15 people know how much weight they have? Like they have 1,000 points on their own. It's just that so I wanted to come back on this because in the federal Conservatives and also the federal Liberals, it's weighted by ridings. You have ridings with a lot of members and ridings with fewer members. It's normal. But I remember with the Conservatives, I think the greatest ratio of weight was like 25-1, right? In Calgary Centre, there were over 2,000 members, and in places in rural Quebec, you had 80, right? But 500-1 is insane to give too much weight to these people. So that would really caught my attention, and I really looking forward to see the complete results. Because if these 15 people go all the same side, if they're courted by all the leadership race and they all go on the same side, that's your winner right there. What about you, Eric?
I'm also sticking with the Liberal leadership race. So my number of the week is 3. So in the entire history of the Quebec Liberal Party, only 3 of their leaders, their permanent leaders, have never become premier.
Ooh, okay.
Can you guess, do you know who they are?
Dominique Anglade is the latest one. The thing is, the others, they would be Claude Ryan.
Yes.
And the third one would be before Claude Ryan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my God. Oh, it's the one against Duplessis in the 50s. La Palme, is that right?
That's right. That's correct. Georges-Émile Lapalme. So there's only been 3. We often talked about the federal Liberals, how there was only a few leaders that never became prime minister. Edward Blake, who we all hate. Edward Blake's the worst. Look him up. Such a whiner. Michael Ignatieff-Stephenio. And now you have the Quebec Liberals, the same kind of thing. They've not had a lot of leaders. Usually, if you become the leader of the Quebec Liberal Party, you will eventually become premier.
Yep.
If the person who is named this weekend does not become premier, it'll be the first time they've had 2 consecutive leaders kept out of the premier's office. So just an interesting thing. Kind of shows the stakes of this leadership race, and also how far this party has fallen over the last little while.
Yeah.
Former party of government, the natural governing party of Quebec.
Yeah.
Over the last since Confederation, and it is now just desperate to see if they can get into a neck-and-neck race with PQ in the 30s. So.
Just desperate to get to double digits among francophones. I mean, it could be cyclical. I would not be surprised to see them go back up, but I would not be surprised to see them, like laying at 19% and 20%. And also the only party in Quebec, naturally, always have been either in power or official opposition. Since Confederation. They've never been lower than that.
Yeah.
So we'll see. It's that Quebec election, man. 5 parties competing for 125 ridings. That's going to be quite insane and a lot of fun for us. So.
Absolutely. And so thanks to everybody for watching or listening to another episode of The Numbers. If you want to support us, you can go to thenumberspod.ca to join the Patreon. Get ad-free audio episodes. You get access to the Discord, and our special episodes. If you want the special episodes as well, you can also join on Apple Podcasts. We've talked about what we might do this week, later this week. I'm not sure if we're going to wait all the way until next year to take a look at our predictions for this past election, but we might actually, that might be the subject of our special episode this week.
We were joking, yeah.
A little bit of self-flagellation to look at how bad our predictions were back in December 2024, about how this federal election would play out. So I think it's about time that we pull that Band-Aid out. So maybe we'll do that this Friday, this weekend. So if you want to listen to that, thenumberspod.ca. Philippe, get ready. It's going to be It's going to be tough. It's going to be heart-wrenching to see how wrong we were just 6 to 7 months ago. But it'll be fun. So I'm looking forward
to it. Merci beaucoup, Eric. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Thank you, everybody. Talk to you later this week.
Yeah, later.